There are certain dates on the calendar that just act like these grim mile markers in cultural history.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
You see the date and you immediately know where you were or what you were doing and how the world just shifted a little bit on its axis. And looking at the calendar today, Monday, February 23rd, 2026, I have a feeling this is going to be one of those dates.
It definitely feels that way. The mood is, it's heavy. There is a very specific kind of gravity to today.
It is heavy because right now, as we're speaking, the machinery of the Los Angeles legal system is grinding into gear in a downtown courtroom. The defendant is a 32-year-old man named Nick Reiner. And the charges, well, honestly, even saying them out loud feels like a glitch in the simulation. 2 counts of first-degree murder.
And not just murder, we are talking about patricide and metricide, the killing of his own parents.
And those parents happen to be Rob Reiner and Michele Singer Reiner.
It's almost impossible to overstate the shockwave this sent through Los Angeles and really the whole world back in December. Rob Reiner isn't just a director. He is the architect of the modern American comfort movie.
Right.
I mean, you look at The Princess Bride or When Harry Met Sally or Stand By Me. He basically built the safe places in our collective imagination.
And that is the exact disconnect we really need to unpack today. You have a man who spent 50 years putting joy and romance and optimism on screen, and his life ends in this incredibly violent, intimate tragedy at the hands of his own child. It feels like a Greek tragedy written by TMZ.
It really does. But our mission for this deep dive today is to refuse to treat this like a cheap tabloid story. We aren't here for the lurid headlines. We've gone through the police reports from that night in Brentwood. We've pulled the court transcripts from Nick's previous conservatorship hearings, which are just fascinating and heartbreaking all at once.
We're definitely going to get into the weeds on that because the legal side is much more complex than people realize.
Exactly. And we've also revisited a film that I think a lot of people missed. A movie Rob and Nick actually made together 10 years ago called Being Charlie. When you watch that movie, now it stops being entertainment and starts looking like a massive cry for help captured on 35mm film.
So we're going to connect those dots. We're going to look at the legal strategy, which took a very weird turn this month. But I want to start with the timeline.
That makes sense.
Because to understand where we are today at the arraignment, we have to understand exactly what happened on that weekend in December. The sources suggest the fuse was lit hours before the actual crime.
Right. If you want to understand the tragedy, you have to look at the night before, Saturday, December 13th, 2025.
The Rainers were out. And they weren't just at a quiet dinner, they were at the holiday party. This was Conan O'Brien's holiday party in Brentwood.
Now, for you listening who maybe don't track the social geography of L.A., you really have to understand the atmosphere of a room like that. This isn't just rich people mingling. This is the inner sanctum of American comedy.
Yeah, the highest status people in the entertainment industry all letting their guard down.
Exactly. It's a very specific high-pressure ecosystem. And into this room walks Rob Reiner, who is essentially a king in that world, and his son Nick. But according to the witness statements collected by the LAPD, Nick isn't blending in.
Not at all.
No, he's agitated. He's described as erratic and disruptive. But it's the specific nature of his behavior that I found really telling. He wasn't just drunk or stumbling around. He was going up to guests, people who are household names, and interrogating them.
Interrogating them about what exactly?
About their level of fame.
Level of fame. That's such a bizarre, piercing thing to ask someone at a Christmas party. It's aggressive, but it's also strangely philosophical in a very dark way.
It is, but think about it from the perspective of a psychiatrist or even just a parent. Nick Reiner is the son of Rob Reiner and the grandson of Carl Reiner. He is a third-generation Hollywood scion. He has lived his entire life in a shadow that is 2 generations deep.
So when he's asking people about their level of fame, he's not really asking about them, is he?
No, he's projecting. It screams of a deep-seated insecurity or perhaps a delusion regarding his own place in that hierarchy. It's what psychologists might call a narcissistic injury. He's in a room where everyone is a somebody, and he perhaps feels like a nobody despite the last name. He's trying to quantify the very thing that haunts him.
And sources say this wasn't a quiet little thing. It caused a scene.
It caused enough of a scene that Rob actually had to intervene. And this is the moment that really resonates with anyone who has dealt with a family member in crisis. You have Rob Reiner, who is beloved for being this jovial, warm presence, having to publicly discipline his 32-year-old son in front of his peers.
The humiliation factor there has to be high for both of them.
Off the charts. Witnesses heard a loud argument. Rob told Nick his behavior was inappropriate. And that seems to be the catalyst. Rob and Michele pull the plug. They leave the festivities early.
I wonder, in that car ride home, do you think they had any sense of danger? Or is this just Nick is having another episode?
That's the tragic reality of chronic mental illness in a family.
Mm-hmm.
The abnormal just becomes normal. You get used to the outbursts, you get used to the erratic behavior. You don't assume murder is next, you assume rehab is next.
Yeah.
They probably thought they were just managing a bad night, not walking into a crime scene.
So they go home to South Chadbourne Avenue in Brentwood.
A quiet, very affluent street. They go into their home, and Nick goes to the guest house where he was living on the property. And the timeline goes completely dark for a few hours.
Which brings us to the early morning of Sunday, December 14th. Police believe the crime happened before dawn, and the forensic details, they tell a story of their own. There was no forced entry.
Which is always the very first thing homicide detectives look for. If the door is kicked in, it's a stranger. The door is locked and the alarm is off, it's someone with a key. It's someone you trust.
The attacks took place in the master bedroom. Cause of death for both was multiple sharp force injuries. Stabbings?
It was incredibly personal, close range. Stabbing is a very intimate form of violence. It requires physical contact. It's not like pulling a trigger from across the room. It suggests a level of rage or a level of psychotic break that is just terrifying to contemplate.
And then we look at Nick's movements. He didn't stay on the property, he fled.
He did. Police tracked him to a hotel in Santa Monica. He checked in around 4 a.m., so immediately after the murders.
And when investigators eventually got to that room, what they found paints a pretty gruesome picture. Blood on the mattress, blood in the shower.
He was washing off. He was trying to clean the physical evidence of what he had done. And we'll get to why that matters legally a bit later, but psychologically it suggests he knew on some level that he needed to hide.
But the bodies weren't actually discovered until that afternoon, and this part, the discovery, is the part that just haunts me.
It was Sunday afternoon. A massage therapist arrived for a 3:00 p.m. appointment.
Just pause on that for a second for the listener, a massage. It implies that Rob and Michele had plans to just continue their life. They had a normal Sunday routine lined up.
Exactly. The therapist knocks, and there's no answer. So they call the person who lives nearby and has a key, which is Rob Reiner.
The youngest daughter, she's 28, a filmmaker herself, very close to her dad. A lot of people saw those TikToks they made together during the pandemic.
She comes over with a roommate to check on them. She enters the house, and the reports state she discovered her father's body first. She was apparently totally unaware her mother was also home and deceased at that exact moment.
The 911 call was actually placed by the roommate at 3:13 p.m. I can't even imagine the trauma of that moment. You walk into your childhood home expecting to maybe wake your dad up from a nap, and you find that.
It completely shatters your world. It's a trauma that divides life into before and after. And for Romy and her brother Jake and her sister Tracy, they are now in this impossible position. They're grieving their parents, and the person responsible is their brother. It's a total implosion of the family unit.
The LAPD Robbery Homicide Division takes the lead. They identify Nick as the suspect, and the manhunt starts. But it didn't last very long.
No. He was arrested that evening around 9:15 p.m. He was in Exposition Park down near USC.
About 14 miles away from the crime scene. And the visual we have of him, it's so mundane, it's chilling. Surveillance footage from a gas station showing him buying Gatorade.
Wearing a dark long-sleeve shirt and a red backpack. Just standing in line buying a sports drink.
What does that say to you from a psychological standpoint? Is that shock? Sociopathy?
It could be severe dissociation. If he was in a psychotic state, he might not have fully registered the reality of what happened, or it could be a complete emotional detachment. But the fact that he was just existing hours after a double murder is deeply disturbing. When police approached him, he surrendered without any resistance.
So now Nick Reiner is in custody, and the headline everywhere is Celebrity Son Kills Parents. But that headline is way too simple. It ignores 20 years of history. We really need to talk about who Nick Reiner is.
Nick was 32 when this happened, but his medical file and his legal file goes back to when he was 14.
14 years old. That's more than half his life spent battling addiction.
Sources indicate he cycled in and out of rehab constantly. But it wasn't just partying. This was clearly a dual diagnosis situation. Mental health issues deeply intertwined with substance abuse. And we know the family tried absolutely everything to help him.
How do we know that for sure?
Because of the conservatorship. Court records show Nick was under a mental health conservatorship from 2020 to 2021.
Okay, let's stop there. Because you hear the word conservatorship and you immediately think Britney Spears. You think of abusive control or financial manipulation. But in California, a mental health conservatorship, an LPS conservatorship, is a totally different animal, right?
Completely different. And it's incredibly hard to get. You have to prove to a judge that the person is gravely disabled.
How does the court define gravely disabled?
It doesn't mean they make bad choices. It doesn't even mean they are an addict. It means they are fundamentally unable to provide for their own basic personal needs for food, clothing, or shelter due to a mental disorder. It is a very high bar. The fact that Rob and Michele got this granted in 2020 means Nick was in profoundly bad shape. He was likely refusing treatment, perhaps experiencing homelessness, and potentially dangerous to himself.
But the records show it ended in 2021. Why? If he was that sick, why did the court let it stop?
That is the ultimate catch-22 of the California mental health system. These conservatorships are designed to be temporary. They expire after 1 year automatically, unless the conservator, in this case the parents, petitions to renew it and proves the person is still gravely disabled.
So if Nick got on his medication, got sober for a few months, and showed up to court wearing a nice suit,
The judge releases him. The civil liberties protections are very strong.
yeah.
The law essentially says you have the right to be mentally ill as long as you want an imminent danger or gravely disabled at that exact moment. So the conservatorship ends, the oversight vanishes, and the cycle just starts all over again.
And the sources say Michele was terrified in the weeks leading up to the murder. She saw the slide happening again.
She did. Reports say Nick believed he was the victim of some grand conspiracy. He was highly paranoid. He thought people were out to get him. That is classic paranoid delusion, potentially schizophrenia or drug-induced psychosis.
And this brings us to what I think is the most surreal piece of evidence in this whole story. The movie, Being Charlie.
Released in 2015.
I watched the trailer again this morning, and it's just haunting. Rob Reiner directed it. Nick Reiner co-wrote it.
It's heavily semi-autobiographical. It's about a son, Charlie, who is an addict, and his father, who happens to be a famous actor running for governor.
The tagline could have been, based on a true struggle.
It was their attempt at therapy through art. They were putting their own painful dynamic on screen. And there are scenes in that movie that just gut you when you watch them now. The father character is initially portrayed as very distant, tough, almost villainous.
And Wright actually addressed that at the time. He did interviews back then saying, that's not me by nature. He said the experts told him to be that way.
Right. He said, I had to act the part of the tough father because the rehabs told me tough love was the only way to save him. He was following the clinical playbook. And Nick, in the script, writes this line about treatment centers. He says they make you feel like you're the problem rather than the program being the problem.
So you have this father and son trying to bridge this massive gap. They make a movie together. They walk the red carpet together. From the outside, it looks like an incredible success story.
It looked like they had successfully exorcised the demons. But the underlying tragedy is that a movie doesn't cure a chemical imbalance. A movie doesn't fix schizophrenia or severe bipolar disorder. It's a temporary catharsis. The illness was still there waiting in the background.
It really challenges the narrative that love is enough. The Rainers had love. They had resources and money. They had the best doctors. They even had this incredible creative collaboration. And it still wasn't enough to stop what happened.
It's a very humbling reminder of the limits of intervention. Sometimes the biology just wins.
Let's shift gears and look at the legal side, because the legal battle here is shaping up to be just as complex as the medical one.
It already is. The charges were filed on December 16th, 2 counts of first-degree murder, and the district attorney added special circumstances.
Multiple murders.
That is the key enhancement. In the California Penal Code, if you kill more than one person, it triggers special circumstances. That makes you eligible for life without parole or the death penalty.
Now, for the listener who might be wondering, California does have a moratorium on the death penalty right now. Governor Newsom put a halt to executions. But prosecutors can still seek the sentence on paper, right?
They absolutely can. And Nathan Hochman, the DA, has said they haven't decided yet. They're going to consult the family before making that call.
Which means asking Jake and Romy and Tracy, just imagine having to navigate that conversation. Do you want us to seek the death penalty for your own brother?
It's an impossible psychological burden to place on grieving siblings. I suspect they will ultimately seek life without parole, but the threat of death is officially on the table.
But the real twist in the legal saga came with the defense attorney. Initially, Nick had Alan Jackson representing him.
Alan Jackson is a shark. He's a former prosecutor. He's handled huge celebrity cases. If you hire Alan Jackson, you are fighting to win.
But on January 7th, he walks into court and just quits.
He withdrew his counsel. He cited circumstances beyond our control, making representation ethically or practically impossible.
It usually means what in lawyer speak, money.
It could definitely be money. Yeah. If the Reiner estate is frozen, which is standard in murder cases when an heir is the suspect, Nick might not have access to the millions of dollars needed to pay a guy like Jackson. Or it could be ethical. If Nick is refusing to follow legal advice or demanding Jackson make arguments in court that simply aren't true, a lawyer has to step away.
But Jackson didn't just quietly leave. He dropped a pretty massive statement on his way out. He told the press outside the courthouse, "Pursuant to the laws of California, Nick Reiner is not guilty of murder."
That phrasing is surgical. He didn't say he didn't do it. He didn't say he's factually innocent. He said, not guilty pursuant to the laws of California.
Help us decode that. What is he signaling to the public and the prosecution?
He is strongly telegraphing an NGI defense. Not guilty by reason of insanity.
Okay, let's go deep on this, because you, listener, might watch a lot of Law & Order and think you know how an insanity plea works. But in California, it's a very specific process.
It is. It's called a bifurcated trial.
Bifurcated meaning split into two parts.
Exactly. If Nick formally pleads NGI, there are two distinct phases. Phase 1 is the guilt phase. The jury looks at the physical evidence, the gas station video, the DNA, the forensic details of the bodies, and answers one simple question. Did he physically commit the act?
Which, based on the Gatorade video and the blood found in the shower, seems like a slam dunk. Yes.
Correct. Phase 1 will likely take 2 days. He will be found guilty of committing the act. But then the exact same jury sits for Phase 2, the sanity phase.
And this is where the real trial happens.
Yes. The burden of proof shifts. The defense has to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that at the exact time of the killing, Nick was legally insane.
And it's crucial to note that legal insanity is very different from medical insanity.
Huge difference. You can be hearing voices, you can be actively hallucinating, but under the Omnitin rule, which is the legal test California uses, you are only legally insane if you were so diseased that you were incapable of knowing or understanding the nature and quality of your act, or are incapable of distinguishing right from wrong.
So if you kill someone because a voice in your head tells you to, but you still know that killing is against the law, you are sane.
Legally, yes. You go to state prison, not a psychiatric hospital. And this is where Nick's case gets incredibly tricky for the defense. Remember the hotel.
The cleanup, the shower.
Prosecutors love that fact. They will argue to the jury. If he didn't know right from wrong, why did he try to hide the evidence? Why did he flee the scene? Flight and concealment show what the law calls a consciousness of guilt.
So the prosecution says he knew it was wrong, and that's exactly why he washed the blood off.
Exactly. And the defense, which is now being led by Deputy Public Defender Kimberly Green, has to argue that even the cleanup was part of the delusion, or that he was so detached from reality that the cleanup wasn't a rational attempt to evade police.
Kimberly Green. So he went from Alan Jackson, high-powered private attorney, to a public defender. That is a massive shift in resources.
It is. Now, public defenders in LA are excellent lawyers, often better trial lawyers than private ones because they are in court every single day, but they are severely overworked. They do not have the infinite budget for private investigators and psychiatric expert witnesses that Alan Jackson would have commanded. It suggests Nick is now effectively alone resource-wise.
And visually, he looks different in court, too. First hearing, he was wearing a suicide prevention smock, like a padded vest. Second hearing, he was in a regular prison jumpsuit.
Which means he has stabilized somewhat in custody. The psychiatric meds are kicking in, which ironically makes the defense's job harder. The jury will see a medicated, calm man sitting at the defense table, and they have to use their imagination to picture the severely ill person who committed the crime months prior.
While this incredibly tense legal battle plays out, we have to talk about the massive hole this has left in the culture. Because Rob Reiner wasn't just a guy who directed some movies.
No, he was a titan of the industry. And his career arc is fascinating. He started as Meathead,
Michael Stivic on All in the Family.
the liberal son-in-law. He was the avatar for the baby boomer generation's political conscience. Arguing with Archie Bunker about the Vietnam War, about racism, he defined the political divide of the 1970s on screen.
And then he steps behind the camera and goes on a run that is statistically improbable for a director. This Spinal Tap, Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, Misery, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men.
It is widely acknowledged as one of the greatest directorial streaks in film history. He gave us phrases like, "These go to 11 and I'll have what she's having." But look at the core content of those movies.
They are comfort movies.
They really are. The Princess Bride is fundamentally about true love conquering death. When Harry Met Sally is about finding your soulmate. Stand By Me is about the purity of childhood friendship. Rob Reiner's work was about human connection. It was about the core idea that people are basically good and that love ultimately wins.
And that is the cruel, profound irony of this whole story. The man who taught us that love wins died in a moment of total disconnection, a moment where love utterly failed to save his family.
It's a violent betrayal of the narrative he spent his entire life building. And Michele Singer Reiner was a huge part of that narrative, too.
She wasn't just his wife, she was a brilliant photographer and a producer.
And for film history buffs,
Uh-huh.
she is the actual reason when Harry Met Sally ends the way it does.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, Rob was single and pretty cynical when he started developing that movie. The original script ending was going to be realistic. Harry and Sally meet years later on the street. They catch up and they walk away. Separate lives.
No running through the streets on New Year's Eve. No, it had to be you speech.
None of it.
Ah.
But during the making of the film, Rob met Michele. He fell deeply in love. And he realized, wait, I want the happy ending. He changed the trajectory of the movie because he found her. She literally rewrote the ending of one of the most famous romantic comedies in history just by existing in his life.
That makes their death together even more tragic. They were a unified front in art and in life.
They were. And they were a unified political front, too.
Right.
We can't ignore their activism. Rob was a major player in democratic politics and policy.
First Five, California.
The tobacco tax that funds early childhood education across the state. That was Rob's initiative. He didn't just support it, he chaired the campaign. He and Michele were also instrumental in the American Foundation for Equal Rights. They spearheaded the legal fight to overturn Prop 8, the gay marriage ban in California. They put their money and their reputation on the line for civil rights.
And from what the sources show, he didn't offer condolences.
No. He explicitly linked Rob's death to his political views. He claimed Rob died because of the anger he caused others via Trump derangement syndrome.
He essentially politicized a double murder committed by a severely mentally ill man. He framed it around Rob's vocal dislike of Trump.
It was widely criticized across the media as a politicization of tragedy. But if you analyze the tactic, it's a refusal to grant empathy to an ideological opponent. It frames the brutal murder not as a family tragedy, but as a direct consequence of political ideology. It's an incredibly dark reflection of the current discourse.
And what's eerie is that Rob had somewhat predicted a silencing. He had that quote recently regarding the FCC.
About Jimmy Kimmel Live being suspended, he spoke out against the FCC and Trump, and he said, "It may be the last time you ever see me."
Now, he obviously meant I might get canceled or taken off television. He didn't mean I'm going to be murdered in my home.
No, of course not. But in hindsight, it adds this chilling layer of foreboding to his final public appearances.
So what about the rest of the family? The people left behind to try and pick up the pieces of this legacy?
There's Jake Reiner. He's 34, a former journalist down in Houston, now an actor and podcaster. He and Rob were massive baseball fanatics. They had Dodgers season tickets. That was their special bond.
And Romy, who we mentioned earlier, who actually found them, she turned 28 just 2 weeks after the murder on December 27th.
The sources say she spent her birthday in absolute silence at a beach house, just trying to breathe and process the unimaginable.
And Tracy Reiner, Penny Marshall's daughter, who Rob adopted when they were married. She's older. She's 61. She released a statement that really stuck with me. She said she came from the greatest family ever, and they described their parents as their best friends.
And that is the detail we have to hold on to. This wasn't a Menendez brothers situation where there was alleged systemic abuse or cruelty. By all accounts, from friends and colleagues, the Reiners were a loving, close-knit, intensely supportive family.
Which brings us back to the core, terrifying truth of this deep dive. You can have the greatest family ever, and severe mental illness can still burn it to the ground.
That's the real aha moment for me when studying these sources. As humans, we desperately want there to be a logical reason for tragedy. We want to say, oh, the parents were distant, or the son was spoiled. It gives us a false sense of control. But sometimes it is purely biology. It's a misfire in the brain that no amount of love or money or fame can fix. They knew the dangers, they got the conservatorship, they made the movie, and they were still utterly powerless to stop it.
There is also the professional fallout to consider. Art that is now frozen in time. Spinal Tap 2 came out just months before the murder. But there was another major project in the works.
Spinal Tap at Stonehenge, a huge concert film. It features Eric Clapton and Shania Twain. It was basically finished.
And what's the status now?
Distribution is completely paused and put on hold indefinitely. And frankly, how do you release it? It's a comedy. Directed by a murder victim, starring the man who was killed by his own son. The context irreparably changes the art. You can't watch it and just laugh right now.
It casts a long, dark shadow over his entire body of work.
It does. Rob Reiner's legacy was pure joy. Now it's going to forever be complicated by this staggering tragedy.
So bringing it all back to today, February 23rd, the courtroom downtown. What are you watching for as this hearing proceeds?
I'm watching for the formal entry of the plea, and I'm watching for the timeline of the psychiatric evaluations. Because as we discussed, this trial isn't going to be a whodunit. It's going to be a whydunit in the most literal medical sense.
It's going to be a prolonged public debate about the legal definition of evil versus the medical reality of illness.
Precisely. And I wanted to leave you, the listener, with this final provocative thought to mull over. Think back to that statement made by the defense attorney. Not guilty pursuant to the laws of California.
It sounds like pure legalese on the surface.
But underneath it asks a profound moral question. If Nick Reiner's brain was genuinely broken, if he was living in a distorted reality where he truly believed his parents were monsters or part of a conspiracy, is he a murderer in the way we understand the word? Or is he a victim of his own biology, just like his parents were victims of his actions?
At what point do we as a society stop blaming the person and start blaming the disease? And can a jury looking at graphic photos of a bloody crime scene actually make that clinical distinction?
That is the exact question that will define this entire trial and how we remember the end of the Reiner family story.
And while the legal case officially begins today, the cultural loss is already permanent. We lost a giant of cinema, and a family lost absolutely everything.
We really did.
We will definitely keep following this case as it moves through the system. We'll break down the sanity phase if and when we get there. Thank you for deep diving with us today.
Take care, everyone.